Why did the general drop her tray? The mess hall at Joint Base Falcon was always too loud at breakfast. Steel trays clanging, boots scuffing on linoleum, the low hum of 800 soldiers starting another day they didn't want to remember. But amid that noise moved one figure so quiet that even the walls seemed to ignore her. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, 34 years old, 18 months on base. She never spoke unless it was to call an order, never complained, never joined in the laughter. They called her Ghost. She came before dawn every morning, long before the first shift rotation. You'd find her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, cutting through boxes of supplies with the precision of a surgeon. Eggs cracked perfectly, knives sharpened to a whisper. She worked like the sound of routine was the only thing keeping her together. No one ever asked about her past, why she transferred from nowhere, why her personnel file was thin as paper. In the military, silence could be a mercy. But sometimes silence hides the kind of truth that burns. That Tuesday morning, the air conditioner was broken again. The heat from the kitchen stung like a punishment. Maria moved between the steam and the smell of grease, her hair tied tight, eyes fixed on the next pan. Her skin glistened with sweat, but her movements never faltered. She was steady, focused, unreadable. At 07:30, the kitchen door swung open. The chatter died. Four-star General Patricia Hawthorne stepped in, her boots clicking sharp against the tile. She was known for order, for cutting through pretense with one look. She didn't visit mess halls often, especially not unannounced. Everyone froze except Maria. She kept working, as if a general's presence was just another shadow passing through her morning. She reached across the counter for a heavy pot of scrambled eggs, and that's when her sleeve slipped up. The general saw it before Maria realized what she'd revealed. A small black eagle tattoo on her wrist. Beneath it, Arabic script, etched like a scar, a memory that refused to fade. The general's hand trembled. Her coffee mug slipped from her fingers and shattered against the floor. The sound cut through the hall like a gunshot. The soldiers went silent. Maria looked up, startled, then down at the broken mug. Her gaze met the general's, and something passed between them. Not recognition, not fear, something colder. Hawthorne's face paled. She had seen that tattoo before. Because she'd signed the approval order for the operation where every soldier who wore that mark had been declared killed in action. Operation Desert Falcon. Delta Force, classified 12 operatives, no survivors. Except one. For a moment, time didn't move. The kitchen filled with the quiet hum of boiling water, the faint hiss of a fryer left unattended. The general whispered to her aide, her voice thin, disbelieving, "That can't be her." But Maria's eyes said otherwise. That night, in a room lined with files and silence, Colonel Morrison from Military Intelligence slid a folder across the table to General Hawthorne. The paper was old, creased from years of being opened and forgotten. Master Sergeant Maria Elena Santos, Delta Force, Deep Cover Operations Specialist, presumed KIA Syria 2 years ago. The colonel's voice was careful. "We confirmed the tattoo, it's real. The entire team was ambushed outside Aleppo during a weapons smuggling intercept. 12 went in. None came out. We identified the remains of 11. 11, the general murmured, not 12. Hawthorne leaned back, staring at the photo clipped inside the folder. A younger Maria looked back at her, hard eyes, confident, alive. "She's been here feeding 800 troops every morning," Morrison said. 18 months. No word, no record of reassignment. Just appeared with standard credentials. Background check clean but shallow. We missed it because we never looked. The general's jaw tightened. Find out who she's talking to. But Maria wasn't talking to anyone. Back in her small quarters behind the kitchen, she sat in the dark. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. On the table, her hands were steady, cleaning a kitchen knife, not with ritual but habit, a different kind of muscle memory. She traced the faint edge of the blade, then looked at her wrist. The tattoo stared back. The eagle, the script, the names she'd never say aloud again. She closed her eyes and saw flashes, dust, blood, the pop of gunfire echoing across a ruined Syrian street. She remembered the last transmission, her team shouting coordinates that no one ever answered. Then static, then silence. She crawled for miles through the desert, half blind, half broken. She buried the dead herself before disappearing into the civilian stream. The betrayal had come from inside. She'd known that even then. Someone high, someone untouchable. So she came home invisible. Not to hide, to watch. For 18 months she had built her cover like armor, routine, monotony, the art of being unseen. She cooked, she cleaned, she listened, she learned. Every supply order that crossed her counter, every contractor name on the manifest, she recorded it. Quietly, methodically, the way soldiers count breaths before pulling a trigger. Now the tattoo had undone it all. That night, as the base lights dimmed, Maria sat on her bunk with her back straight, her eyes unblinking. Somewhere, the general was calling in her name, and the network she'd been tracing for over a year would start to move. The men responsible for her team's deaths, their names, their signatures, were in those same files she handled every day. But she wasn't done yet. Morning came again at 600. The mess hall opened like always. Soldiers laughed again, unaware that beneath the hum of the kitchen, the ghost had begun to move. Maria's hands moved automatically, tray, ladle, rinse, repeat. She could feel the eyes now. Intelligence officers pretending to be casual, asking about her background, smiling too easily. She didn't answer. When Colonel Morrison finally approached her during evening cleanup, she didn't turn. He watched her scrub a pan, the muscles in her arm taut, the silence between them heavy. "Master Sergeant Maria Elena Santos," he said quietly. She stopped. Her hand froze over the soap-filled water. Slowly, she lifted her head. No longer the invisible worker. Her posture straightened, eyes locking on his. "You shouldn't be here," Morrison said. "I could say the same to you." He hesitated. "We thought you were dead." "I was." There was no sarcasm, no emotion, just truth. "Why here, why Falcon?" Maria dried her hands and motioned to the door. "Because this is where the contracts flow through. Every bullet, every crate that passed through Syria started with a supply line here. You don't need satellites to find corruption. You just need receipts." Her voice was low but sharp, controlled. "Your cover blown," he warned. "The general knows you can't stay." Maria's eyes softened, almost like pity. "You think this is about staying?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You don't know what they did to us. We were about to expose the contractors who were running smuggling routes under Pentagon approval. They sent us in blind. Someone on the inside gave away our position. 11 good people died for it." Her gaze didn't waver. "I'm not leaving until I finish what I started." Later that night, when security footage caught her entering a restricted storeroom, Hawthorne and Morrison watched from the command center. "What the hell is she doing?" the general whispered. Maria opened a locked crate. Inside, documents, old manifests, coded transfers. She'd been collecting them piece by piece, every night for months, building a silent case in a hidden corner of the kitchen. Her wall was covered with photographs, names, wire routes, and circled dates. Strings connected base contractors to offshore accounts, each line a path toward the betrayal that killed her team. She built her own intelligence cell out of paper, tape, and quiet grief. When the general and the colonel entered, she didn't look up. "I've been tracking the same network you've been pretending doesn't exist," she said. 18 months of evidence. Names you know, accounts you don't. The same signatures that greenlit my mission." The general's breath caught. "You think you can take them down alone?" Maria finally turned, her face calm. "I already have." A silence hung between them, a silence thick with disbelief and the weight of something unspoken, respect. Hawthorne stepped closer, eyes softening for the first time. "You should have come to me." "I did," Maria said quietly. "2 years ago, in Syria, you just didn't listen." For a long moment the general said nothing. Then she nodded slowly, painfully. "You have 48 hours. After that, your cover's gone and this base becomes a battlefield." Maria's lips curved faintly, the first shadow of a smile in 18 months. 48 hours is enough. As they left the room, Morrison turned back. "What's your endgame, Santos?" Maria looked at the map pinned to the wall, her finger tracing the lines of betrayal like old scars. "Justice," she said softly, "nothing louder than that." Outside, the night deepened over Falcon Base. Soldiers slept. The kitchen sat empty, but behind the thin walls of the storeroom, a quiet storm was gathering, one woman against a network of ghosts who thought they'd buried her. They were wrong. And for the first time in 2 years, Maria Santos allowed herself a whisper of emotion, not anger, not revenge, just purpose. Because ghosts don't haunt the living, they finish what the living couldn't. What does a soldier dream of when the dead still whisper? Maria didn't sleep that night. She never really did. Her eyes stayed open in the dark, watching the ceiling fan spin, the sound dull and rhythmic like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. The base outside was quiet, only the occasional hum of generators cutting through the night. But inside her head, the desert was alive again. The smell of burnt metal, the cry of a dying man calling her name through the static. She turned her head toward the small locker beside her bunk. Inside it were photos, torn edges, faces half erased by time and sand. 11 of them. She touched the corner of one, Sergeant Blake, her spotter. He used to hum under his breath during missions, said it helped him aim. "The day you stop hearing music out there, Santos, you're already dead," he used to joke. She still hadn't told anyone how long his song had played after the shooting stopped. Maria blinked hard, forcing herself back to the present. She sat up, swung her legs to the floor, and reached under the bunk. From a hidden compartment, she pulled out a worn field notebook wrapped in oilcloth. Its pages were lined with codes, coordinates, and scribbled names. She flipped to the last entry she'd written that morning. 48 hours. That's how long she had before command would pull her out or shut her down. She'd spent 18 months building this web. Now it had to mean something. Outside, dawn broke pale and tired. Soldiers filed in for breakfast like clockwork. Laughter returned to the mess hall, but something invisible lingered in the air, an awareness. People glanced her way and then looked down quickly. The ghost wasn't just a nickname anymore. It was a story they didn't understand, and in the military, you learned not to ask about ghosts. Maria served like always, measured portions, steady hands. But behind that calm rhythm, her mind was running calculations. Every name on the daily manifest meant something now. Every delivery route, every contract approval, every face in the line could connect back to the men who'd sold out her team. She didn't know which of them had pulled the trigger, but she knew who had opened the door. By noon, General Hawthorne called her in again. The office was sterile, decorated with medals that gleamed like memories no one wanted to question. The general stood by the window, looking out over the training fields. "I've reviewed your files," she said without turning. "All of them." Maria said nothing. "You were the best we had. You shouldn't have been in that operation without proper intel. That wasn't your fault." Maria's voice was quiet, but it was your mission. The general's shoulders stiffened. "You think I wanted that ambush? You think I'd send 12 of my people into a trap?" Maria met her gaze. Someone did. The silence between them was heavy, thick with everything they couldn't say. Hawthorne sighed. "You're still angry." "No," Maria said, "I'm patient." It wasn't bitterness, it was discipline. The general studied her. There was something unsettling about Maria's composure, like a fuse that had learned how to burn without exploding. Finally, Hawthorne said, Colonel Morrison's putting together a task force. He wants you to debrief, share your evidence. We can bring these people down properly." Maria shook her head slowly. "If I give you everything, they'll vanish before sunset. The same network that buried my team will bury this investigation too." "You don't know that." "Yes," she said softly, "I do." The general turned away. "You can't do this alone." "I already have." Maria left the office before Hawthorne could stop her. The general's reflection lingered in the glass, haunted, uncertain. She had signed the papers. She had approved the mission. And she'd believed the report that Maria Santos was dead. Now the dead was walking her halls, forcing her to remember. Outside, heat shimmered across the tarmac. Maria paused by the storage hangar, eyes narrowing. A convoy of supply trucks was being prepped, same contractor name she'd circled a dozen times in her files. Raven Logistics. It was just another subcontractor on paper, but the money trail told a different story. Offshore accounts, weapons shipments disguised as medical aid, a silent artery of betrayal running through the U.S. military's own logistics network. Maria waited until the trucks rolled out, memorizing every license plate, every face in the cab. Then she turned away and headed back toward her quarters. But her mind wasn't at Falcon anymore. It was back in Syria. They landed under moonlight. Operation Desert Falcon, 12 operators in full gear, black helmets reflecting the faint shimmer of desert heat. Their mission: intercept an arms deal between local smugglers and a group linked to stolen U.S. weapons. Intel had said small-scale exchange. Contained, simple extraction. It was. She remembered the radio chatter, the static, the calm tone of her team leader, Captain Reeves. "Eyes up, secure the perimeter. No civilians, quick in, quick out." Then the first explosion hit. She remembered the sound of sand raining like glass, the way her ears went silent before the screaming began. She remembered Blake pulling her behind a burned-out truck, shouting something she couldn't hear. And she remembered looking up, just long enough to see American-made drones circling above, drones that shouldn't have been there. Friendly fire, no, something worse. They weren't supposed to survive that night. She crawled through the wreckage, broken and half-conscious, hearing her own pulse echo in her helmet. The smell of burning fuel, the taste of ash, the sight of her teammates scattered like ghosts in the firelight. When dawn came, she buried them, one by one, using her hands, using what was left of her strength. By the third grave, her body gave up. But something in her didn't. She found the last transmission logs before she destroyed her comms. A call sign she didn't recognize. An encrypted authorization coming from a contractor network, not military command. Someone had fed their coordinates, someone inside the system. That's when she disappeared. She spent 3 months off the grid, no name, no country, moved through aid convoys and refugee lines, learned silence like a weapon. Then she found the first paper trail, an invoice for weapon parts routed through a civilian supply chain linked back to Falcon Base. It all led here. And so did she. Back in the present, Maria laid out her notebook on the desk. Her fingers brushed across each page like she was touching the past, her handwriting steady even when her heart hadn't been. Every entry told a story of survival disguised as routine. She remembered the day she got the kitchen posting, how easy it had been to vanish inside the monotony, to wear an apron instead of armor, to trade a rifle for a ladle. It was almost peaceful at first. But peace was never free. Now, as she stared at the evidence she'd gathered, she felt the old ache return, the one that sat between her ribs, the one that sounded like guilt. She could almost hear Blake again, his easy grin as he cleaned his rifle before every mission. "You worry too much, Santos. Trust the chain." She trusted it, and it had hung them. There was a knock at the door. Colonel Morrison stepped in quietly. He didn't wear his rank tonight, just fatigue and hesitation. "You've been through hell," he said. "I get that, but this is suicide. These people aren't just smugglers, they have protection." Maria's expression didn't change. "So did my team." He sighed. "If you're right, then this goes way above both of us." "I know," she said. "That's why I didn't go through channels." He looked at her wall, strings, photos, names. "You built this alone." She nodded, piece by piece. "Every form, every transfer, every crate. I see everything that passes through this base. They thought I was invisible." "You can't keep doing this without backup." Maria turned to him, eyes hard. "Backup died in Syria." He had no answer for that. After he left, she sat alone again, the room humming with the low vibration of anger that never found its voice. She closed her notebook, slid it into her bag, and looked at the clock. 42 hours left. She stood by the small window, staring out at the darkness over Falcon Base. Somewhere out there, the trucks she'd watched earlier were moving toward the border, loaded not with food or supplies, but with the same weapons that had killed her team. And this time, she wasn't waiting for permission. She whispered a name, Blake, and turned off the light. Because sometimes, justice didn't come in daylight. Sometimes it came dressed like a ghost. What does silence sound like when it becomes a weapon? Maria moved through the dark like a ghost, finally reclaiming her name. The corridors of Falcon Base were empty after midnight. Only the hum of lights, the distant echo of generators, and the slow, rhythmic sweep of security cameras turning on their arcs. She knew the timing of every rotation. She'd memorized the steps of every guard. This wasn't luck. This was discipline, the same precision that once kept her team alive long enough to die together. Her boots made no sound on the tile. She passed the storage hall, then the comms hub, pausing only to slide a small device from her pocket, an old encryption disruptor, built from scavenged parts. It pulsed faint blue as it jammed the nearby feeds for 10 seconds. 10 seconds was all she ever needed. She slipped inside a logistics office, closed the door softly, and began to work. Stacks of shipping manifests lined the desk. She opened the latest one, her eyes moving quickly through the data columns. Supplier, route, authorization code. There it was again. Raven Logistics, same signatures, same initials, and PR. She whispered the letters under her breath, like tasting the poison to know it by name. Major Preston Riley. She remembered that name from Syria. The contractor liaison who approved their extraction request, 3 hours too late. He'd filed the report that their team was already dead before the last gunfire had even stopped. Now his name was here, authorizing deliveries that should never exist. Maria pulled her notebook out, jotting coordinates, dates, and cross-references. Her movements were quick, methodical, but her heartbeat was. She paused, staring at the folder in her hands. What was justice supposed to look like now? In the dark, with only paper and ink to fight back, the word felt small. She exhaled slowly, pushing the thought away. She couldn't afford to doubt, not when ghosts were all she had left. As she closed the last file, a faint noise caught her attention, a footstep outside the door. Maria froze. Her hand went instinctively to her hip, forgetting she wasn't armed. Old reflexes die hardest. Another step, slow, careful. Then a voice, "You shouldn't be here, Santos." She turned. Colonel Morrison stood in the doorway, half-shadowed, holding something in his hand. Not a gun, her field notebook. Her chest tightened. "You followed me." "I had to," he said quietly. "You're making enemies you can't even see." She stepped closer, calm but cold. "You mean the same enemies who killed my team?" He sighed. "You think Riley's behind it?" "I don't think," she said. "I know." Morrison lowered his voice. "If you're right, he's not working alone. There are people higher up who will bury this before it reaches daylight. You expose this now, and you'll vanish for real this time." She looked past him, through the glass panel where the corridor light flickered. Then maybe it's time I stop hiding. He watched her for a moment, then handed her the notebook. You've got 36 hours. After that, command takes over. Maria took it without a word. As he turned to leave, he said softly, "You can't keep carrying the dead, Santos. They don't need you to avenge them." She met his eyes. "You're wrong, Colonel. They're the only reason I'm still here." Morning came with a storm rolling over the desert horizon, gray clouds pushing against the pale dawn. Rain was rare here, but today it felt earned. Maria stood by the mess hall window, watching it fall. The first rain in months. It felt like memory washing through metal. The soldiers around her laughed and pointed, running out into the drizzle like children. For them, it was novelty. For her, it was penance. General Hawthorne entered quietly, her uniform immaculate as always, but her expression was softer than before. She joined Maria at the window. "You used to be one of my best," she said. "Now I can barely recognize you." Maria didn't turn. "Maybe you're finally seeing me." The general folded her arms. "I read your reports. You were always disciplined, detached, the kind of soldier who did the job without asking why. But this looks personal." "It is." "That's the problem." Maria finally looked at her. "You signed the mission order." "I know. And you never questioned why a Delta team was sent in without air support, without backup, and with civilian contractors monitoring the feed." Hawthorne's jaw tightened. "I followed the data I was given." "Data they fed you," Maria said. "You were their perfect signature. No one would question a 4-star general." The rain streaked down the glass, cutting the reflection between them into fragments. Hawthorne's voice lowered. "You want me to say it was my fault, that I killed your team?" Maria didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence said enough. Finally, the general whispered, "You think taking down Riley will fix this?" "No," Maria said softly, "but it'll stop someone else from ending up like us." The general studied her for a long moment, then reached into her pocket and slid a small keycard across the counter. "Storage Wing B, East Sector," she said. "That's where Raven's files are backed up. If you're going to do this, you'd better move fast." Maria hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" Hawthorne's eyes met hers. "Because I've spent 2 years trying to forget that file on my desk, and you've made that impossible." Maria took the keycard and nodded once. As Hawthorne walked away, the general looked back briefly. "Whatever happens next, make sure it's worth the ghosts you carry." By nightfall, Maria was already deep inside Storage Wing B. The air was cold here, sterile, humming with the vibration of secure servers. Blue light painted the walls. Rows of steel cabinets stood like soldiers, guarding their secrets in silence. Maria swiped the card. The light turned green. Inside the archive, she connected a portable drive to the main terminal. Files blinked onto the screen, transaction logs, encrypted communications, satellite transfers. And then she found it. Operation Falcon Down. Not the mission she knew, but a parallel file. Internal notes, hidden authorizations. She opened it. The words hit her like impact. Authorization, MP Riley. Oversight, P. Hawthorne. Field clearance, D-class contractor relay. Objective, neutralize compromised operatives. Neutralize. Her breath caught. It hadn't been an ambush. It had been an execution. Her team hadn't died in a crossfire. They'd been erased. A soft sound echoed behind her, a step. Maria turned, hand instinctively going to her belt. Major Riley stood in the doorway, calm as a man walking into his office. "You shouldn't have opened that," he said. Maria's heartbeat slowed, deliberate, measured. "You buried them." "They were compromised," Riley said flatly. "They saw too much. You were supposed to be part of the cleanup. You sold us out for money." He smiled faintly. Not money, stability. You have no idea how deep this goes. The contractors, the politics, the funding, you think one team mattered. Maria took a step forward. They mattered to me. Then you've already lost. He reached for his sidearm. But Maria had moved before the thought finished forming. She slammed the terminal's power core into his hand, sending the weapon clattering across the floor. He stumbled back, swearing, clutching his wrist. She pressed him against the wall, her forearm pinning him in place. "You killed them," she whispered. "You made me bury them." He sneered. "You should have stayed dead, Santos." Her hand tightened. For a moment everything around her disappeared, the hum of the servers, the faint smell of ozone, even her own breath. Just him. Just the memory of fire and sand and 11 names. But then she stopped. Because killing him wouldn't bring them back. And vengeance wasn't justice. She released him, letting him drop to the floor. "You'll talk," she said. "You'll tell them everything." He laughed weakly, wiping blood from his lip. "You really think they'll listen?" She looked down at him. "They don't have to." She picked up the drive, still glowing with copied files. "This does." Then she turned and walked out, leaving him gasping on the floor, his laughter echoing after her like broken glass. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean again, washed, almost innocent. Maria stepped into the open yard, the drive in her pocket, her face wet with more than rain. The ghosts were quiet now. Not gone, just watching. Because the hardest part wasn't surviving. It was learning how to live with the ones who didn't. And Maria Santos still had 30 hours left to make their deaths mean something. What happens when the truth starts to breathe on its own? By dawn, Falcon Base was no longer quiet. Alarms didn't sound, not yet, but the stillness had changed. A subtle current ran through the air, a kind of collective unease that soldiers felt before anyone told them why. The base that had moved in perfect rhythm for months now pulsed with tension. Maria watched it all from the mess hall window, coffee cooling in her hand. She'd been awake for 30 hours, her eyes hollow but steady. Outside, convoys rolled out like nothing was wrong, but everything was. Because somewhere deep inside Falcon's data system, a file had copied itself to 4 secure terminals: command, logistics, intelligence, and one she hadn't chosen. The Pentagon. She hadn't meant for it to spread that far. She'd only intended to make sure the evidence couldn't be deleted if she disappeared. But when she inserted that drive, the encrypted script she'd built from scavenged code must have triggered a full relay upload. Now everyone knew. The smuggling network, the money, the betrayal. And the mission that wasn't an ambush, but a sanctioned erasure. Maria could almost hear her own heartbeat under the low hum of the cafeteria's lights. Someone had just pulled the pin. She felt the shift before it reached her ears, boots outside the hall, too many of them moving too fast. When the door swung open, 4 MPs entered, followed by Colonel Morrison. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. "Maria," he said quietly. She set her coffee down. "They got the files." He nodded once. "Command's in chaos. Riley, been detained, for now, but Washington's already calling this an internal breach." She gave a small, humorless smile. "They're calling me a traitor again, aren't they?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. "Where's the general?" she asked. "In a briefing. She's defending you." Maria blinked, surprised. She shouldn't. "She's trying to keep this contained," he said. "The file exposed too much. There are names in there even she didn't know. Senators, defense contractors. If this spreads outside the military, the whole command chain fractures." Maria looked past him toward the kitchen staff cleaning tables. Young, tired, unaware that their ordinary world was about to tilt. "They're coming for me," she said softly. Morrison's jaw tightened. "You knew that the moment you pushed send." She nodded. "I just didn't think it would feel this quiet." He looked at her a long time. Let me help you. You already have. Maria. But she'd already turned away. If they find me before I'm done, all of this dies with me. He hesitated. Then tell me where you'll go. She picked up her tray and walked toward the sink. You'll know if I fail. The general's office was chaos. Papers covered the table. Voices overlapped, legal, military, political. Everyone had an opinion, but none had courage. General Hawthorne stood at the head of the room, spine rigid, eyes locked on the projection screen showing lines of exposed data, transactions, authorizations, the words Operation Falcon Down flashing in red. An admiral from D.C. slammed his hand against the desk. You let a presumed dead operative infiltrate your base, access secure archives, and release classified data to the Pentagon network. How does that happen? She wasn't infiltrating, Hawthorne said. She was exposing treason. You call it treason, the admiral shot back. I call it containment. We've already lost 3 contractor partnerships over this leak. Congress is demanding answers. Hawthorne's voice hardened. Then give them the right ones. The admiral leaned forward. You're protecting her. Why? The general's eyes didn't waver. Because I read the file, and I saw my signature on the mission order. You want someone to blame? Start with me. The room went silent. For the first time, the admiral looked uncertain. You're willing to go down for her? No, Hawthorne said. I'm willing to go down for the truth. She turned toward her aide. Find Santos. Bring her to me quietly before they do. Maria walked through the supply depot, her pace steady but her senses sharpened. She could feel eyes on her now. Soldiers she didn't recognize, unfamiliar uniforms, contractors embedded within security teams. They'd come for containment. She moved toward the exit, blending with a group hauling crates, her face calm, her body language unthreatening. But her mind was already calculating distances, angles, exits. 2 men followed her. Their formation was off, too direct, not MPs. Private security, Raven. She turned into a maintenance hallway, heart beating slow and deliberate. As she reached the end, she slipped into a side door and waited. When the first man came around the corner, she was already behind him. A sharp, controlled strike to the throat, not to kill, but to silence. He dropped without sound. The second man reached for his weapon, but she disarmed him before his hand met the grip. A twist, a slam, and he was on the ground gasping. She leaned down, her voice low. Who sent you? He spat blood. You're finished, Santos. They're wiping you clean again. Her jaw tightened. Not this time. She pressed his radio and listened, orders coming through. Contain the asset. Terminate if extraction fails. Asset. She was a soldier once. Now she was just inventory. Maria walked out into the sunlight, head high, each step slower, calmer. She wasn't running anymore. By the time she reached the outer compound, the base was locking down. Sirens blared, soldiers redirected, convoys rerouted. Overhead, a helicopter circled low. The storm she'd unleashed had arrived. General Hawthorne's voice crackled through the base intercom. All personnel stand down. Repeat, stand down. No one engages Staff Sergeant Maria Santos without direct authorization. Maria stopped walking. Her eyes lifted toward the speaker, rain beginning again in soft drops. She almost smiled. Hawthorne had made her choice. She turned toward the hangar. Inside, Morrison waited beside a running vehicle, an unmarked Humvee, rear seats removed for cargo. She told me to get you out, he said. Maria shook her head. I'm not leaving. Maria. She can't fight this from inside her office. I can. He stepped forward. If you stay, they'll erase you, this time for good. She looked past him, to the rows of planes lined under the gray sky. Maybe that's what it takes. Morrison's voice cracked. You can't win this alone. She met his eyes, calm, resolute. I never was alone. And for the first time, he understood. The ghosts she carried weren't just memories. They were her armor, her purpose. He handed her a comm unit. They'll trace me for this, but you'll have a direct link to the general. She's buying you time. Maria took it, fingers brushing his just long enough to say thank you without words. Then she walked into the rain. The command center flickered with alerts, unauthorized movements, data breaches, system overrides. General Hawthorne stood before the screen, jaw set. Santos is moving, her aide said. What are your orders? Hawthorne's eyes hardened. Let her. But ma'am, she's not escaping, she's finishing it. Outside, thunder rolled across the desert. Maria reached the communications tower on the far edge of Falcon Base, a narrow structure that linked their secure lines to off-site command. The metal stairs were slick from rain. Her breathing was steady as she climbed. Inside the top level, she connected the comm unit Morrison gave her, rerouting the signal through multiple encrypted channels. Falcon Tower, this is Santos. A pause, then Hawthorne's voice came through, calm but tight. Talk to me. I've got everything, Maria said. Names, signatures, recordings. If I transmit now, this goes global. No more containment. The general's reply came low. You know what that means. You won't walk away from this. I know. You could hand it to me. Let me take the fall. No, Maria whispered. This isn't about one fall, it's about ending the climb. Silence filled the line. Then Hawthorne said quietly, they'll call you a traitor. They already did. The signal flared, thunder rumbling outside. Maria looked down at the base, soldiers running, lights flashing, the entire world below her caught between truth and fear. She pressed the transmit key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the data stream activated, a cascade of encrypted files leaving the tower, bouncing between satellites faster than anyone could stop it. And with it, the truth. Every name, every signature, every lie. Maria exhaled, shoulders trembling with the release she'd held for 2 years. Down below, floodlights snapped toward the tower. Soldiers shouted. Vehicles surrounded the base of the structure. Maria, Hawthorne's voice came through again, softer now. You've done enough. Maria smiled faintly. Not yet. The door behind her burst open. Armed men flooded the platform. Private contractors, not military, Raven's final play. Maria stepped back, hands raised halfway. Her eyes were steady. You won't stop it, she said quietly. It's already out. The lead man hesitated, his earpiece crackling. Then you die for nothing. No, she said, I live for them. He raised his weapon. And then from the comm unit still active on her wrist, Hawthorne's voice broke through, firm, commanding, full of fire again. Stand down, that's an order. For a moment, even the rain held its breath. Outside the tower, the first rays of dawn cut through the storm. Somewhere far away, in an office that once buried her existence, Maria's name appeared again on record, not as deceased, not as disgraced, but as Master Sergeant Maria Elena Santos, active. Because sometimes, the only way to live with ghosts is to give them peace. And sometimes, peace begins with a single voice refusing to stay silent. What does freedom look like when the world calls it treason? 3 days. That's how long it had been since the transmission left Falcon Tower. 3 days since Maria Santos became the most wanted soldier in the country she'd once died for. The world outside was burning with questions, headlines flashing words like betrayal, leak, shadow operations. Political anchors speculated about internal corruption. Contractors denied everything. The Pentagon issued statements that sounded like apologies carved out of fear. And somewhere in the middle of that chaos sat a small, windowless room. Maria sat inside it. Her wrists were cuffed to the table, her posture straight, her face calm. The light above her buzzed faintly, flickering with the hum of recycled air. Across from her sat a man in a pressed uniform too clean for combat. He didn't give his name, didn't need to. He was just another handler in a system that made ghosts. He opened a file, flipped a page, and said, "You understand you're being charged with unauthorized access, classified data breach, and endangering national security." Maria's voice was low. "National security's what killed my team." He looked up unimpressed. "You're a soldier, staff sergeant. You don't get to decide what's right." She met his gaze without blinking. "Then who does?" The question hung there. He didn't answer. They never did. Instead, he leaned back. "You think leaking those files changes anything? It just makes the machine hungrier. You think the people you exposed won't be replaced by others?" Maria looked down at her hands, pale under the harsh light. "Then at least I made them bleed first." The man studied her. "You don't sound proud." "I'm not," she said. "I'm tired." He closed the file and stood. "You'll be transferred tomorrow for formal tribunal. Until then, you'll remain here." He moved toward the door, paused, then looked back. "Do you regret it?" Maria didn't hesitate. "No, I regret not doing it sooner." When the door closed, the hum of silence returned, that thick, heavy quiet that filled spaces where justice should have been. Maria closed her eyes. For a moment, she could smell the desert again, hear Blake's voice, feel the soft press of sand between her fingers as she buried the dead. Then she opened her eyes, back to the cell, the walls, the noise of isolation that pretended to be peace. On the other side of those walls, the world was moving. Falcon Base was under investigation, half its staff reassigned, contractors frozen out of federal contracts. General Hawthorne sat in a debrief room surrounded by military lawyers, her uniform stripped of medals but not dignity. She turned herself in the moment the files went public, refusing legal counsel. "You understand, General," one of the investigators said carefully, "that your cooperation is appreciated, but it doesn't absolve you of your role in Operation Falcon Down." She nodded. "I understand." The man across from her looked uneasy. "For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing protecting her." Hawthorne's expression didn't change. "I didn't protect her, I failed her." He frowned. "She leaked classified data." "She told the truth," Hawthorne said quietly, "and the truth was classified to protect criminals." He hesitated. "You know she'll face a tribunal." "Yes." "And the verdict won't be kind." She leaned forward. "Then make sure you're in the room when they read it. Someone should remember what honesty looks like." Colonel Morrison stood outside Maria's holding cell later that night. The guard hesitated before unlocking the door. "She's not supposed to have visitors." Morrison's voice was steady. "She's not a visitor. She's the reason you're still wearing that uniform." The guard stepped aside. Inside, Maria sat in the same position, still composed, eyes distant. He pulled up a chair, sat across from her, and for a long time neither spoke. Finally Morrison said, "They're spinning it. The politicians, the contractors, they're painting you as a rogue agent. The networks are eating it up." "I expected that," Maria said. "They're saying the files were fake, that you fabricated evidence to cover up your own operation gone wrong." "Let them." He frowned. "You don't care." Maria looked at him, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen. "I care that the truth's out there. I don't care what they name it." Morrison leaned back, studying her. "Hawthorne, under review too. She confessed to authorizing the original mission without full intel. She's taking responsibility." Maria blinked slowly. She didn't have to. She wanted to. They sat in silence again. The faint buzz of the lights filled the space between words. Then Morrison said, "Do you know what people are calling you?" She gave a faint smile. "I can imagine. The ghost of Falcon. They say you took down a billion-dollar network with a kitchen knife and a file drive." Maria's expression didn't change. Stories always need ghosts, It makes the living feel safer. He hesitated. What do you want me to tell them when they ask why you did it? She looked down at the table. Her reflection stared back from the polished steel surface, eyes tired, lips still, a face that didn't look like anyone's savior. Tell them I got tired of burying good people for bad reasons. Morrison nodded slowly. You'll never see daylight again, you know that. Maria met his eyes. I already didn't. He didn't argue. As he stood to leave, she said softly, Colonel, the next time someone like me knocks on your door, asking to tell the truth, listen. He swallowed hard, then nodded and left. Maria leaned back in her chair and exhaled. The ghosts were quiet again, but not gone. They never would be. Outside, the world kept spinning. In newsrooms across the country, whistleblower groups debated her actions. Some called her a hero. Others said she'd endangered operations abroad. Senators made speeches about integrity while rewriting bills in the same breath. But something had shifted. A month after the leak, 2 contractor heads resigned. 3 internal audits led to suspended funding. And 1 quiet ceremony was held in a closed section of Arlington. 12 names added to a granite wall. No speeches, no cameras, just silence. Among the attendees were General Hawthorne and Colonel Morrison. The sky was gray. The air smelled faintly of rain. They stood side by side before the new names etched in stone. She'd want to see this, Morrison said. She can't, Hawthorne replied softly, but she'd be proud. The colonel nodded. You know they'll never release her, not officially. The general looked down. Some ghosts belong in the dark. She placed her gloved hand on the stone, but they still light the way. Weeks passed. Maria's cell didn't change, same walls, same light, same endless hum. But one morning something new happened. The door opened and a young officer stepped in. He looked nervous. Ma'am, I have orders to relocate you. She studied him. To where? He hesitated. They didn't say, just not here. She stood slowly, chains clinking softly against the table. You knew. Yes, ma'am. She smiled faintly. You don't have to call me that. He held her gaze. You earned it. The words caught her off guard. He gestured toward the hall. They'll escort you. Maria nodded, walking past him. She didn't ask where they were going. Maybe it was another cell. Maybe it was a quiet disappearance. But as she stepped outside the facility, the first thing she saw was the horizon. Open wide. And the sky blue again. She stopped, closing her eyes for a second. The air was cool. It smelled of freedom, even if it wasn't hers. A single vehicle waited. Morrison was in the driver's seat. She climbed in silently. He didn't look at her, didn't smile, just drove. After a while, he said, They're erasing the records. Officially, you were never detained. Never at Falcon. You never existed. Maria watched the landscape roll by. Ghost again. He nodded. You're free in a way, but off the books, permanently. She looked out the window. Good, maybe that's where I belong. He hesitated. There's one more thing. The general wanted you to have this. He handed her a folded envelope. Inside was a single photograph, 12 soldiers in desert fatigues, smiling against the Syrian sun. Her team. On the back in Hawthorne's handwriting, some ghosts deserve peace. Maria traced the faces with her thumb. The car slowed as they approached a crossroads, one road leading back to the city, the other toward open desert. Where to? Morrison asked. Maria looked at the empty horizon. Home doesn't exist anymore. Drive until it's quiet. He nodded. The sun dipped lower, painting the world in gold and shadow. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Maria whispered almost to herself, They'll forget my name again. Morrison glanced at her. Maybe, but not what it meant. She smiled faintly. That's enough. The desert stretched ahead, endless, unforgiving, honest. For the first time in years, She felt something close to peace. Because sometimes the price of truth isn't freedom, it's silence. And sometimes, silence is the loudest kind of justice there is. How do you live when the world forgets you on purpose? The desert stretched endlessly before her, a horizon that didn't care about names, medals, or ghosts. Maria stood there, boots sinking into the sand, watching the wind erase her footprints almost as soon as she made them. It had been months since her release, or whatever they called it. No official paperwork, no signature, just a quiet drive, an unmarked road, and freedom shaped like exile. Now she lived where the sky was wide and the nights were honest. A small cabin stood a few miles from an abandoned airfield, a relic of a forgotten war. She'd found it empty, fixed the roof, rewired the generator, and painted over the bullet holes without asking who had fired them. Some nights the silence pressed against her like a memory that refused to fade. Other nights, it was mercy. Her days were simple now. She rose with the sun, cooked just enough for one, and kept her radio tuned to frequencies that no one used anymore. Old habits died harder than ghosts. Sometimes she'd hear faint static, the kind that sounded almost like voices if you wanted it to. She told herself she didn't. One evening, she sat on the porch watching a dust storm roll across the plains, the air electric and gold. She sipped cold coffee and listened to the desert breathe. She thought of her team, of the laughter before missions, the quiet before insertion, the weight of promises made between people who knew not all of them would come back. She remembered Blake's grin, Reeves' calm orders, Morale's jokes, all those fragments that made up a family born out of war. They weren't coming back, but somehow their story had. The news had died down weeks ago, buried under fresh headlines and newer scandals. But not everyone forgot. Maria found proof one morning when a small package arrived, no return address. Inside was a folded newspaper clipping. Headline: Whistleblower sparks oversight reform in defense contracts. Below it a quote from General Patricia Hawthorne, now retired. The system doesn't fail because it's corrupt. It fails because good people stay silent long enough to let it. Maria traced the words with her fingers, her expression unreadable. Then she folded the clipping and placed it in her field notebook, the one she still kept on her nightstand, its pages filled with evidence, ghosts, and memories that refused to die. That night she dreamed of rain again. The next morning, a vehicle approached her cabin. It was old, government-issued, the kind that didn't travel this far without purpose. Maria watched from the porch as it stopped a few yards away. A young woman stepped out, uniform clean, eyes sharp, but voice uncertain. "Master Sergeant Santos." Maria didn't answer. She hadn't heard that title in a long time. The woman tried again. "Ma'am, my name's Lieutenant Aaron Voss. I was told to find you." Maria's tone was flat. "Who sent you?" The lieutenant hesitated. "General Hawthorne." Maria's eyes softened just slightly. "She's still fighting." Voss nodded. "She's leading an independent inquiry now. Civilian oversight. She said if anyone deserved to hear what's next, it's you." Maria gestured toward the small table outside. "Then talk." The lieutenant sat, pulling a folder from her bag. "We've reopened several covert operations linked to your case. Command can't cover them anymore. Too many eyes, too much public attention." "Good," Maria said quietly. "There's more. Congress is establishing a new internal watchdog division. They're calling it Project Aegis. Independent, transparent, recruits from all branches." Maria studied her. "And you want me to believe that'll make a difference?" Voss hesitated. "Maybe not right away, but someone had to start it." Maria smiled faintly. "Hawthorne. She said you'd say that." They sat in silence for a while, the desert wind moving softly through the dry grass. Then Maria asked, "Why are you here, really?" Voss swallowed. "Because I read your file, the real one, the unredacted one. What happened in Syria, what you did after I just... Her voice faltered. I wanted to see if someone like you could still believe in us. Maria looked away. You want me to say I forgive the system? No, Voss said. I want to know if I should stay in it. Maria leaned back, her eyes on the horizon. The question hung heavy in the dry air. Finally, she said, the system isn't evil, it's just lazy. It lets rot grow until someone cuts it out. You want to change it, don't ask permission. Do the work, then be ready to pay for it. Voss nodded slowly. That's what she said too. Maria's eyes flickered with faint amusement. Then she's learning. The lieutenant stood. If you ever want to come back. Maria raised a hand. No, the world doesn't need me in uniform. It needs people like you to remember what happens when uniforms forget why they exist. Voss hesitated. She said to give you this. She placed a small box on the table, plain metal, no markings. Inside was a medal, the Distinguished Service Cross. Unclaimed. Maria stared at it for a long moment, then closed the box. Tell her thank you, but ghosts don't wear medals. Voss nodded, saluted quietly and left. Maria watched her go until the vehicle disappeared into the heat. When the silence returned, she whispered to no one, but sometimes they leave them behind. That night she couldn't sleep. The desert outside was alive with the low hum of wind and faraway thunder. The kind of storm that didn't bring rain, only reminders. She stood by the window, looking out at the dark. On the table, the metal box glinted faintly under the lamp. She picked it up, opened it again, and stared at the cross. Not for valor, not for victory. For endurance. For remembering when it would have been easier to forget. She set it down beside the old photograph of her team. Their faces smiled back, younger, alive, unaware of how the story would end. I did what I could, she murmured. That's all we ever do. Outside, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the landscape like a memory of war. But it wasn't the same anymore. Because this time the ghosts didn't haunt her. They stood beside her, silent, proud, at ease. Months later, a small letter arrived in her mailbox, handwritten, military-issue stationery. It was from General Hawthorne. Maria. They're rebuilding what we broke, slowly, clumsily, but they're trying. You were right about Raven, they're finished. Morrison been promoted. He's heading the new oversight division. I think you'd approve. They asked me to rejoin the advisory board, but I told them I'm done leading from above. Truth doesn't climb ladders, it digs trenches. I've retired to a quieter life, though I suspect you're still watching from the shadows. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be. If you ever find peace out there, I hope you let it find you back. P. Hawthorne. Maria folded the letter and placed it in her notebook with the others. The photo, the clipping, the medal she would never wear. She sat outside again as the sun set. The world was quiet. The sky bled orange and red like fire learning to rest. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. Not as a soldier, not as a ghost, but as someone who had finally stopped running from the silence. She looked down at her wrist. The tattoo still there, the small black eagle, the Arabic script faded but unbroken. Underneath it, she'd added a line herself, carved in careful ink. For those who stayed. She didn't cry. She just smiled, faint and tired but real. Because the mission was never revenge. It was remembrance. And sometimes, remembrance was the bravest act of all. As night settled, the wind carried the faintest echo, laughter, boots on sand, a voice calling her name through memory. She closed her eyes. I hear you, she whispered. I'm still here. The stars above the desert glowed like watchful eyes. And beneath them, Maria Santos, soldier, survivor, ghost, sat in quiet peace, knowing that the story she'd carried in silence for years had finally spoken loud enough to change the world. Not through bullets, not through glory, but through truth. Because some wars don't end when the shooting stops. They end when someone finally refuses to look away. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. How long does a name live after the world erases it? 2 years had passed since the leak. Falcon Base had changed, not in its walls or uniforms, but in the air that hung over it. The noise was different now, sharper, more aware. Orders didn't echo with the same blind certainty anymore. They carried weight. Every new recruit learned about Operation Desert Falcon during ethics orientation, not as a lesson in betrayal, but in silence. The instructors never said her name, but the story lived between the lines. A team betrayed. A survivor who became a ghost. A truth that refused to stay buried. They called it the Falcon Doctrine, transparency before obedience. And though it was never printed in any manual, every young soldier who passed through those halls could feel her story like a quiet heartbeat beneath the floor. Lieutenant Aaron Voss still remembered the day she'd driven into that desert to find her. Now she stood at the front of a new generation, teaching cadets about chain of command, integrity, and the cost of silence. She paused mid-lecture, letting the room fall into stillness. "When someone tells you to follow orders without question," she said, "ask yourself what it costs to obey." One student raised a hand. "But ma'am, doesn't questioning orders weaken the mission?" Voss smiled faintly. "Only if the mission can't survive the truth." The class was silent. Somewhere deep in the building, a clock ticked softly, steady, unhurried, patient. When the lecture ended, she lingered at the window, watching the sun burn across the horizon, the same sun that had once scorched the Syrian desert. She didn't tell her cadets that she still sent letters to a P.O. box that never replied. She didn't tell them that some nights, when the wind was just right, she thought she heard a radio signal, faint, broken, a voice calling out in static. She just smiled to herself and whispered, "Still watching, aren't you?" General Patricia Hawthorne, retired, gray-haired, slower now, sat in front of a committee room in D.C., a hearing televised but half-empty. She didn't belong to the system anymore, but the system couldn't quite let go of her either. The senator across the table leaned in. "General, do you believe the reforms are working?" She studied him. "Reforms don't work, people do." "And what about the culture of secrecy you once defended?" "I didn't defend it," she said quietly. "I lived in it, and it nearly destroyed everything I believed in." The senator looked at his notes. "Some still say the whistleblower's actions compromised national security." Hawthorne smiled just slightly. "National security isn't a building, Senator. It's a promise, and we broke it before she ever did." He hesitated. "You're referring to?" She raised a hand. "I'm referring to someone who taught me that loyalty without conscience is cowardice." Her voice softened. "The quiet ones, the ones no one notices, they're the ones who hold the line when leaders fail." After the hearing, reporters swarmed her, but she didn't stop. She said what she needed to say. The rest was noise. In her hotel room that night, she poured a glass of whiskey and sat by the window, staring out at the lights of the Capitol, artificial stars built by hands that still thought power was the same as truth. On the table beside her sat a photo frame, 12 soldiers in desert gear, a familiar face in the middle. She raised her glass to it. "You were right, Maria, about all of it." Her reflection in the glass looked older than she felt, but they're learning, slowly. Outside, thunder rolled. She smiled. "You always did like storms." Far from D.C., in a quiet veterans rehabilitation center outside Tucson, Colonel Morrison walked the courtyard paths with a cane and a notebook under his arm. He'd traded his uniform for simple clothes, his rank for purpose. The new generation didn't call him sir anymore. They called him mentor. He spent his days helping soldiers find their way back from trauma, from regret, from war. One of them, a young Marine with a trembling hand, asked him once, "Sir, how do you live with what you've seen?" Morrison thought for a long time before answering, "You don't. You just stop running from it." The Marine frowned. "What made you stop?" Morrison smiled faintly, tapping his notebook. "A friend. She taught me that silence can be as dangerous as a weapon." He looked up at the sky, the endless Arizona blue, and thought of her again. The woman who had refused to let the world pretend. Sometimes at night, he'd write letters he never sent, updates she'd never read. "They're rebuilding Maria. Falcon's different now. The kids question things, they talk, you'd like that. I hope you found peace out there. We're still trying to earn ours." He'd fold the paper, slip it into a drawer, and sit in the dark until morning came. A man haunted not by guilt anymore, but by gratitude. And somewhere far away, in a small desert cabin beneath a wide, merciless sky, a radio crackled. Maria sat beside it, hands steady, eyes calm. The world had mostly forgotten her, and she preferred it that way. She lived quietly now. The radio was her only companion, tuned to channels long abandoned, but sometimes she caught fragments, messages, echoes, a voice reading training exercises or a song played through static. The ghosts had stopped whispering. They'd made room for the living again. One evening, the signal sharpened unexpectedly. A familiar tone hummed through the old speaker, followed by a voice she hadn't heard in years. "This is Falcon Command, broadcasting on emergency relay frequency Delta. If anyone's out there, we remember." Maria froze. Her heart beat once slow, heavy. Then she reached forward and turned the volume down to a whisper, as if afraid to scare the moment away. She leaned close, eyes glinting in the lamplight. The voice repeated, "We remember always." She smiled, small and real. No one knew she was listening. They didn't need to. The message wasn't meant for her, not directly. It was meant for anyone who still carried the weight of silence. But somehow, she knew it was hers all the same. Months later, on a cold morning at Falcon Base, Lieutenant Voss walked past a new plaque installed in the mess hall. It wasn't large or ornate, just brushed steel and engraved words. "To those who serve without being seen. To those who act when silence demands obedience. To those who remember." No names, no dates, just a small emblem carved beneath the text, a black eagle, wings spread. Voss stopped, tracing the shape with her fingertip. She'd seen that eagle before, once on a wrist that had carried the weight of a dead unit and a living conscience. She smiled barely. Behind her, a group of recruits passed, laughing quietly over breakfast. One of them noticed the plaque. "Who's that for?" Another shrugged. "Nobody knows, some classified story from years back." Voss turned slightly, listening. The third recruit, quieter than the rest, said, "Doesn't matter who. Whoever it was, they did something big." Voss smiled again, this time fully. As she walked away, she whispered, "You did more than big, Maria. You did right." That night, a storm rolled over the desert again, lightning dancing across the horizon, rain sweeping through Falcon's runways. Inside her cabin hundreds of miles away, Maria watched it through the window. Her hands rested on the old metal box, still closed. She could hear the wind howling, the same song it had always sung, fierce, lonely, honest. She opened the notebook one last time, turning past the pages of evidence, notes, and sketches until she found a blank sheet. She took a pen, hesitated, then began to write. "To whoever finds this. If you're reading it, you've already seen the cost of silence. Don't waste it. The world doesn't need heroes, it needs witnesses. Be both when no one else will. MES." She tore out the page, folded it carefully, and placed it in the notebook's back cover before closing it forever. Then she stepped outside, barefoot in the rain. The sky split with thunder. Water ran down her face, washing dust and time and ghosts away. For a moment she tilted her head back and laughed, a sound she hadn't made in years. The wind swallowed it whole, carrying it across miles of open desert, where no one could hear but everyone somehow would. Because the truth had a way of echoing through stories, through actions, through people who refused to forget. And even if her name never returned to the records, it didn't need to. It lived in the doctrine cadets recited, in the reforms Hawthorne built, in the compassion Morrison taught, in the question that every soldier would now ask before pulling a trigger or signing an order. It lived in every whisper of integrity that refused to die. Maria Santos had vanished into myth, not as a hero, not as a ghost, but as proof that even the smallest act of conscience could outlive the empire that buried it. And under the same storm that had once marked her beginning, she stood, unafraid, unseen, and finally free. Because the quietest voices sometimes leave the loudest echoes. And the bravest acts are often the ones no one sees. Where do ghosts go when their wars finally end? Years passed. Not suddenly, not with fanfare, just quietly like sand moving through glass. The world that once condemned Maria Santos had already moved on to new crises, new headlines, new wars that felt like copies of the old ones. But in certain corners of power, her shadow still lingered. The reforms she'd forced into being, oversight councils, whistleblower protections, the Falcon Doctrine, had changed the way commands were written, the way silence was weighed against conscience. The system hadn't healed, but it had learned to listen. And somewhere in that noise of politics and progress, the memory of one woman, a cook, a ghost, a soldier, still whispered through the halls where she once served invisible. No one spoke her name officially. It was too dangerous, too complicated, too human. But they knew. They all knew. 10 years after the leak, a memorial ceremony took place at the newly dedicated Center for Ethical Command, built on the edge of the Arlington grounds. Rain fell lightly over the crowd. Flags hung still, heavy with the weight of meaning. General Patricia Hawthorne, older now, her medals traded for wrinkles and quiet, stood at the podium. Behind her, etched into marble, were 12 names. And beneath them, one line of text in plain font. Dedicated to those who acted when silence demanded obedience. She didn't need to look to know which name wasn't there. Maria had never wanted it. Hawthorne adjusted the microphone, her voice steady but thick with something the military never trained her to control. "There's a saying among soldiers," she began. "That silence keeps us alive. That discipline is survival. But sometimes silence is the very thing that kills what we swore to protect." She paused, rain dripping from her cap brim. "I learned that lesson too late. Someone else paid the price. Someone who understood that duty without conscience is just obedience, and obedience without truth is betrayal." She looked out over the crowd, rows of cadets, officers, veterans, civilians, and her voice softened. She never wanted recognition. She just wanted the truth to outlive her, and it has. Hawthorne stepped back, eyes glistening. "That's all I can say." The applause was quiet, respectful, heavy. No anthem followed, no speeches, just silence. It was what Maria would have wanted. After the ceremony, Hawthorne found herself wandering the memorial gardens alone. The rain had stopped. The world smelled like new earth, raw, honest, unhidden. She stopped beneath a tree and took a small object from her coat pocket. A folded letter, edges worn, handwriting fading. It was Maria's, sent years ago before she disappeared completely. "You once said loyalty is what holds the military together. Maybe you were right. But truth is what holds people together. Don't ever let one outrun the other." Hawthorne smiled faintly. "You'd still be scolding me, wouldn't you?" The breeze moved gently through the trees, carrying the smell of wet grass and something faintly metallic, the scent of memory. For a moment she swore she heard a voice, soft, low, unmistakable. "Still watching, General." She turned her head, half expecting to see someone there. There was no one. Only a crow perched on the fence post, its black wings gleaming like polished ink. She laughed quietly. "I guess you always preferred the shadows." Thousands of miles away, Lieutenant Aaron Voss sat in her office at Falcon Base, now part of the Ethics Division. Her desk was covered in reports, reform drafts, evaluation protocols, the administrative face of everything Maria had set in motion. But on the wall, framed in simple glass, hung a single piece of paper, the handwritten note Maria had left in her notebook, discovered years later by a field inspector who'd stumbled across the abandoned cabin. "If you're reading this, you've already seen the cost of silence. Don't waste it. The world doesn't need heroes, it needs witnesses." No signature, just the initials, MES. The cabin had been empty. No signs of struggle, no remains. Just that note, the field notebook, and a metal box left open on the table. The wind had scattered the sand inside, as if she'd simply walked out into the horizon and let it swallow her again. Voss would never tell anyone, but she liked to think Maria had found a new desert to disappear into, one where no one would order her to hide or fight ever again. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, cadets were drilling in the yard. Their movements were sharp, but their eyes, they looked different now. More alert, more questioning. "Alive," she whispered. "You did it, Maria." Meanwhile, in a classroom at the base, a young recruit named Private Taylor sat in silence after the day's briefing. The instructor had spoken about the Falcon Code, about integrity, about accountability. Taylor wasn't supposed to, but he lingered after class, staring at the memorial wall just outside. The brushed steel plaque gleamed in the afternoon sun. He didn't know the name of the person it honored. None of them did. But he felt it, the kind of story that doesn't need words to exist. He raised his hand slowly, touching the carved eagle emblem. His mother used to say there are people who make noise and people who make history. The first are remembered for a while. The second are never named at all. Taylor smiled. "Guess you were the second kind." Then he turned and walked away, the reflection of the eagle lingering on the metal behind him. That night, as storms gathered over the desert again, somewhere beyond the reach of radar and registry, a faint campfire burned. It flickered against a rock wall marked with time and wind. Beside it sat a figure, hair streaked with silver now, eyes still sharp, wrapped in a weathered military jacket. Maria Santos watched the fire and listened to the wind. A radio rested beside her, its static humming like a heartbeat she'd never turned off. She picked it up and spoke softly into the receiver. Her voice cracked with age but carried the same calm strength. "This is Ghost," she said, "frequency Delta checking in." A pause. Then static. No answer. She smiled, didn't think so. She leaned back against the rock, looking up at the stars, thousands of them, sharp and endless. "Guess it's just me now," she whispered. "That's fine." The fire popped softly. Sparks rose into the air, vanishing into the dark. Maria reached into her pack and pulled out a folded photograph. The same one from long ago, the team in Syria, frozen in that perfect moment before the world turned. She looked at it for a long time, then set it beside the firelight. "You got your justice," she said quietly. "Took a while." The wind shifted, carrying faint echoes, laughter, orders, a hum of old voices that weren't really there but never really left. She closed her eyes, letting them stay. When she opened them again, dawn was beginning to push at the horizon, soft gold bleeding through the black. She stood, dusted the sand from her knees, and picked up the radio once more. "Ghost out," she said simply, then turned it off. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was peace. Maria stepped toward the light, her shadow stretching long across the sand, a silhouette swallowed by morning. Somewhere behind her, the fire burned low until only the photograph remained, half-lit, half-ash, glowing softly in the first light of day. The wind picked it up gently, carrying it across the desert. And for a moment, just a moment, the sound of her voice drifted through the static one last time, as if the air itself remembered. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Then the signal was gone. But not the echo. Because echoes have a way of finding their way home, in classrooms, in ceremonies, in the hearts of soldiers who still believed that truth mattered more than rank, and conscience mattered more than comfort. And somewhere, in every act of courage that began in silence, a small piece of her still lived. Not as a soldier, not as a ghost, but as a reminder that even the quietest among us can carry the loudest truth. Fade out. Rain over the desert. A single eagle flies across the sky, black against gold. Voiceover soft, reflective, final. Some wars never end. Not because the fighting continues, but because the silence does. And sometimes all it takes to break it is one quiet voice refusing to disappear.